Welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Kathryn Peterson here with my wonderful co-host, Michael Regan. And today we've got another fun book club episode for you. And I just finished a book, which was The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. And I'm pretty excited just to talk about some concepts in the book and how they relate to our industry and how I've implemented some of them into my workday. And also maybe a little bit into my personal day, so we can talk about that as well. So first, I'm going to welcome in Michael. Michael, thanks for being here.
Yeah, Catherine, it's going to be fun to unpack this one because not only was this a book you mentioned to me that you were reading and finding some inspiration, if not even application from, I happened to notice this one on my wife's book stand as well, and so she was reading it at the same time. Maybe this is a popular book club book right now, no pun intended, and it sure spurred my curiosity because when people I respect, like you and like Lori, are reading a book like this, it naturally makes me want to learn more about it. So I'm really excited to dig into it and learn more about the let them theory.
Great. Well, let's get going on things. So I think when I think about what this book overall concept, I mean, I think why people pick it up is let them. And so maybe we dig into that a little bit first. What do you think?
Well, it feels like the way she frames this theory is it's an approach that I believe is helping maybe the listener or the reader to recognize that we all naturally have a need to want to control others. We want to control the conversation. We want to control the process. We want to control a lot of things. And isn't it just real life that other people don't always groove with us in those areas that we want to control, and sometimes they want to take things in a different direction. They want to talk about something different. They want to handle it differently than we would have. They maybe even insist on doing it their way, not our way. And so it just seemed like in the macro concept, this application probably hits all areas of our lives because we all run into this, whether at home or at work, where people are at some level of conflict over just who's going to be in control. So that
Mhm.
at the get go interested me. What did you learn about that when you were reading, Catherine? Tell me a little bit about how you saw control through the lens of the let them theory.
Yeah, so for me, it, and it's not even that initial thing of, let's say someone says, "Hey, I'm gonna stay up late," and you're like, "No, you need to do the like, right?" So, but a lot of times we aren't letting people suffer their own consequences, right? So part of it is saying, okay, let them go to bed late, let them decide not to pay a credit card that they, decide they know where I stand on it, but they're going to have to deal with the consequences and lay in the bed that they've made. So I think some of it's backing off and saying, hey, this is life a little bit, not in a harsh way, but more everyone is going to make decisions, and that's okay, because honestly, the more you try to steer a decision in someone's life, sometimes it is. If it's a teenager, they might do the exact opposite. We've both been in that situation. But I think it's also pulling back a little bit and saying, hey, they asked for advice. I'm going to give them that. But then whatever they decide to do, that's okay. And I can let them make that decision. And I'm not going to get worked up with myself about that decision.
Yeah, that's some really good illustration because I think that applies to a lot of our listeners' lives. If you're listening out there and you're a small business owner, or you're a team leader, or you're a parent, there's going to be just a lot of application for that because I think it's fair to say that sometimes in those situations, what we've got to recognize is her theory is letting us shift the control from needing to control the situation to maybe more of a self control of my own emotions. How am
Yeah.
I going to let what you do or don't do affect me emotionally? Am I going to get jacked up over that? Am I going to get
Mhm.
worked up to the point where we have to argue over that? Am I going to even elevate it to the point where now I'm mad about it? It lets me retain if not reclaim some of that energy, and
Mhm.
bring some peace back into my own execution when I let go and let them. So I can see the we're in the context of control. It's a paradigm shift. It's instead of trying to control the situation, I think I'll focus on controlling my own emotional reaction to the
Mhm.
situation.
Yep, which is definitely hard. It's helpful when you kind of say that, like, hey, it's their decision. I'm going to let them make that decision and backing away from that. And I think one of the applications I've seen it work is, let's say someone decides to pick a different lender, and we can get ourselves so worked up about that decision. And so many times it's like, oh, I messed up this, I messed up that. So it's going back to what you said and controlling my emotions about the situation and just saying, hey, let them do that. There's been a lot of clients that use somebody else and come back for the second one. Or they might get turned down, but they've got to experience that for themselves and then come back later. So we have to kind of release that and let it do. I think of the song. Oh, you're gonna like this because it's a music reference. Like, you belong among the wildflowers. For some reason that popped in my head, where you gotta sometimes just let somebody do their thing and then come back when the time's right.
Well, look at you picking a classic 1995 Tom Petty solo album. One of my favorites, very pastoral, very beautiful, and really well played. You've probably been through an exercise like this with me, Kathryn, but often when I run into clients who are struggling with that control piece, I'll have them do what I call a CIA exercise. And this is a really simple brain dump where I get them to identify the situation. What's the challenge here? What are we dealing with? And let's look at our options through the lens of three categories. CIA. What are the things that you actually do control? You can make the call right now and it'll happen.
Mhm.
What are the things you influence, which means you can make the call and attempt to get some influence from the situation that might positively move it in a direction that you like, but you don't control it. You just get to influence it. And influence has a lot to do with your attitude, has a lot to do with your um, emotional intelligence, your ability to recognize what someone else might be dealing with. But it leads to that third category, which I think is where we landed on this one, which is accept. That's the A. And there are some things that are best solved by accepting. If we only stay in the control and influence category, we fall into this fallacy of thinking, well, I can make it happen. I can make anything happen. I can do anything if I work hard enough to figure it out. And sometimes in life, we learn that timing plays a factor and also someone else's ability to resist plays a factor. And
Mhm.
if we spend our time pushing on something outside of the timing that it's going to work, or even worse, we push on something where someone else says, the harder you push, the more I dig in and resist. It creates tension and stress, and I think that's what was relieving to me in hearing Lori debrief the book and then doing a debrief with you was, wow, here's an outlet, here's a way in which we can honestly and quickly identify how to relieve that stress. And so by choosing to let others continue with whatever they're doing, it really allows us to get our focus back maybe to more of the appropriate questions of what do I really want? What is it that really matters to me? What hill am I willing to die on? How
Mhm.
is this worth it? And the answers to those questions aren't always easy. And sometimes they create an inner struggle all by themselves. But at least by redirecting your attention from other people's behaviors to your own goals and outcomes, it allows you to ask, am I willing to give my best energy away or put it towards something that I think is actually possible, which is my ability to change the way I think? That's a power shift. And
Mhm.
it's not so obvious to people at first. Most people want to
Mhm.
fight to win. This one is a different, it's not a give up the fight, it's redirect the energy and direct it back toward yourself.
Exactly. That's a very good way to put it. And I think a lot of people see this book and say, well, you're just basically stepping back and letting anyone do anything. And that's not really the case, because the second part of it is, let me, like, what can I do to say, okay, great. Well, if my kid decides to stay up late, that's great. Now, what are my choices? Well, you know what? I'm not going to coddle them in the morning when they are super tired and say, "Oh, it's okay, I'll call you out of school." They get to suffer the consequences of that. So you also have to let me. So if there's a situation that isn't that, let's say a client is being really, really mean, great, let them do that. But then now it's back on me. My choices are I can fire that client. I can, you now have choices. And so you have to say, okay, now what are my choices based on that? And I think that's an important piece of that is it doesn't just step back. It also says, hey, now I know where things sit. What do I need to do in this situation as well?
Yeah, you're really smart to hinge that comment together, because I think that's the setup. If the setup that we just discussed is to shift the focus away from trying to control them to self control, once I've actually done that, now I can explore those let me options. Now I can explore the things that I can do. And that's really the outcome of that CIA exercise is once
Mm-hmm.
I've got that clear, well, now I can do these things that I control. I can really work hard with a positive attitude on these things I influence. And guess what? I can save my good fuel by accepting those things that I'm not going to control or influence,
Mm-hmm.
because pouring energy into those is negative. Those all become let me activities. Now I can sort those out in a way to where I'm making, let's call them, better decisions. None
Mm-hmm.
of this is about perfect solutions. And I think that was one thing that I took away as well in debriefing this was, as an author, Mel's not suggesting that, hey, this is a solution for all of your problems. It's a mindset, it's a shift. And once your mindset is in a place where you're allowing a little more light into a dark situation, you're more likely to choose things that create progress or create win-wins. And some of those are going to come from some of that self-reflection. How about this one, Kathryn? The other piece I saw in there were it also helps you identify where healthy boundaries could be. Because I think you hinted at this. It doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
maybe another miss that people get. They see this as, oh, just be passive, just be milk toast, let them walk all over you. And I don't think that's at all what her
Mm-mm.
intention was. Tell me a little bit about how boundaries work into the let them theory.
Yeah, so what I was seeing is that can be things like, hey, in order to protect myself and to protect my peace, I'm not going to pick up a call if it's 8 p.m. Um, I great, they can call and they can get upset about me not picking up, but that's a boundary that I have to set for myself and for my family. Or it might be that, hey, I'm willing to wake up my kid in the morning. I'm not willing to call them out of school. And there's certain boundaries that have to be set, right? So I think those are all things that we can do to just say, hey, even if it's an employee, yes, you can have a be flexible with a loan process. You can step back and kind of let things work versus control every single thing somebody does in a day. But you also have to have boundaries on, hey, let's say that there's a major problem, you have to submit a file within 2 days or whatever those things are. So you can have some boundaries. I think that's okay in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, boundaries are a really effective tool. The visual I give people is think about them like your property line. If your property line has boundaries on it, you might choose to put up a fence, and that fence serves a two-way purpose. It not only defines in the relationship with your neighbors where the property line exists, but it also lets, at the very same time, lets them know what we're keeping outside of the fence, and lets maybe you and your loved ones know what is safe inside of the fence. So it creates real clarity. And I think the key to really good boundaries is communication. If I don't let you know where that boundary is, I might know it, but if I don't let you know, I'm really setting you up poorly for us to have a confrontation. So unless you're using your boundary to bait somebody, which I highly recommend against, this is probably not great behavior. But if you're doing if you're taking seriously this act of establishing boundaries, find a way to communicate it. Make sure they know. If someone's irritating the heck out of you because they just keep calling you and hounding you and pounding on an issue and they won't let it go, and you want to apply the let them theory, one of the things you can do is establish a boundary. You can tell them something like, hey, I've decided not to engage in a one-sided conversation. So as long as you're calling me just to yell at me or complain at me, that's not something I'm going to choose to participate in any longer. I'm going to decide that that doesn't work for me. But if you choose at some point to come back and you're interested in a two-way conversation, I'm open to having that. That's a boundary. That doesn't say get the hell away from me and never call me again. It just puts some definition to what that boundary means. No different than the perimeter. A fence around your home probably has a gate. It's not that we can't let people in or
Mm.
let people out. We're not in a jail
Yeah.
cell, but we define the rules of engagement when that gate opens. Who's coming in, who's coming out, and
Mhm.
what the rules are. So how put that back into a work context for me, Kathryn. How are you setting boundaries in ways that applies to whether they're positive or negative control issues, ones in which you have to create the definition? How are you communicating that with teammates, clients, partners? What does a boundary look like?
Well, a quick example is, hey, I have a super scheduled week. So I would love to meet with you, but let's always make an appointment because it's difficult. I feel bad if you call or you swing in and I'm unavailable. So here's my appointment links. There you go. I mean, that's a very simple boundary we can set for ourselves.
I like that one a lot because it has a positive connotation to it. You're actually saying, I'd like to meet with you, and I don't want to disappoint you or frustrate you,
Hmm.
even worse, that you came all the way down here and I wasn't available. That's a really great example. And I'm glad you mentioned it because I think most people tend to gravitate toward boundaries in a negative context of, oh,
Hmm.
I've got to, I've got to burn the bridge to keep the crazy person from following me. Well, that's a pretty extreme boundary. I think most of the time we want to establish those in a positive way. And if you think about that in your personal life, it's no different. If you've got young kids at home, I think you and I can remember this from a decade ago. They don't totally understand the work that we do, and so they just want to play. They just want your attention. They want to go out and have fun. The key to a good boundary is not only establishing your availability, but then honoring it, like really showing them that, hey, I really am going to close the laptop. I really am going to walk away from my phone. I really am going to reinforce the positive side of that boundary. You respected the space I needed. I'm going to now return that respect because I want us to have a healthy boundary in the future. Those are great examples. All right.
Yeah.
So maybe one more tie down on this, because I think about what she described sounded to me like empowerment through detachment. And detachment meant simply this: her ability to say, let's detach ourselves from the emotional dysregulation that happens when
Hmm.
we're in that conflict of control, and instead of personalizing that other person's actions,
Yep.
you're getting more control over your own emotional response, and that
Hmm.
creates, I think her point was, a little more space for personal growth. This is how
Yeah.
you can maybe grow in areas of your emotional intelligence. Did you experience anything there that you said, okay, that's an area that our listeners could benefit from when you think about empowerment through emotional detachment?
Yeah. So one of the things you start to realize the more you think about this is sometimes you care about really weird things. Like
Mm,
you'll be like, why do I care if this person does this thing? And why is that bothering me? And if they do it that way instead of this way, does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? And it doesn't. And so I think the more you detach, the more you can see things a lot more objectively and go, oh yeah, that I don't know why I even brought that up because it was just a waste of words. And so I think you do start to realize some of the more important things. And that also means that most likely you're using your words for really impactful things. And I think that sometimes we just put our opinion out there when it's not needed. And I think the more people sometimes will hold back, boy, does that really make people listen when you have really thought about it, taken out the emotion, and then you can speak logically about something. So I think that's really where that empowerment and freedom kind of comes. And Imagine if you weren't really worrying as much about some of those silly things, what that does to your mental space and your mental freedom.
Well, okay, so let's play out one of your earlier examples so that we show
Hmm.
that this thing is designed to flow through all of these examples. If in fact I created that natural detachment, so I just didn't get
Hmm.
so wound around the axle. I wasn't
Yeah.
going to be emotionally disrupted by someone's choice, but I'm going to let them. I'm going to let them figure out. Well, in the event that what they figure out was, oh, that wasn't such a great choice after all, and now I'm somehow privy to the what's next because maybe they need to come back to me and say, after all, maybe I should have listened to you, or maybe if I didn't get so emotionally wound, it also allows me to stay humble when they come back
Hmm.
versus I told you that wasn't going to work. I told you that was a bad idea, which is just going to restart the problem in the first
Hmm.
place, which is who's in control. I'm basically uh, waiting for the gotcha or the I told you so instead of taking that detachment and realizing, hey, it's okay. We all, need to figure things out. And sometimes
Hmm.
you figure them out differently than I do. As long as we get to a place where we can work forward from it, back to your point, why should I care that you do it differently than I do? The goal is just
Hmm.
to figure it out.
Exactly. And we can burn bridges. And that's definitely brought up of, if someone does something and you do explode. So imagine if client decides to go elsewhere and I am a total jerk about it and say a whole bunch of things that I can't take back. They're never going to come back. Versus, let's say that they end up using someone else, the loan closes, and 5 years later, they're like, you know what? I don't even remember who we used, and I didn't really like that person. Let's go back to Kathryn. They're going to be willing to do that. Versus if I was a total jerk, they're like, heck no. So I think that you do have to think about that in your life. And I'm lucky that I'm in a small town, so we really can't burn bridges here. So we have to figure out a way to not burn bridges.
Yeah, think about that. I mean, you're in a small town, and if you burn that bridge, it's not just that relationship, it's their ability to say, well, I don't know who would ever work with that woman again. She is nuts. And if they start sharing that within your net or their network, your small town isn't big enough for that to take very long before you're going to hear about it, and it's not going to be positive. And now it's
Right.
affecting other people's opinions. And even if they're willing to suspend belief, we don't live in a junior high experiment. Nobody really
Hmm.
wants to live their life as an adult, as a professional, thinking, well, I heard you did this to her. Well, I heard you said that. I mean, just think about what the implication would be of burning that bridge and the compound effect of what could happen. It's really wise to recognize that this gives you an opportunity to not only work through it with that individual, but really minimize the collateral impact of being dramatic and maybe
Hmm.
doing or saying something that you later really regret. It,
Yeah.
it goes back to that emotional intelligence, the ability to control your emotions at a level to where you have more options. And I think that's the strength side of it that I see is, you know,
Hmm.
if I'm really struggling with wanting to control a situation, the root of that is that I probably have high expectations of I want a really good result. I want something that matters to me because it's the
Hmm.
right thing or a good thing, or let's assume positive intent. It's going to be a good thing. If I can shift my mind to where I decide, okay, so instead of putting the fuel in a direction to where I'm willing to fight over that, if I'm willing to let someone do something different and that might produce a different result than I expected, I might now be in a much greater position of strength when we're going to actually figure out how to deal with it. If I just
Hmm.
decide to be annoyed by that, then I limit the benefit of that. But if I decide to see it as an opportunity to grow, I'll bet over time I'm perceived by others as not just being slow to anger. I'm probably going to hear words like, you're really wise, you're really patient, you're really smart. And most people that want to be in control, they like those descriptive words. That's probably what they're really hoping for.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Well, with that, I think we are ready to close out this episode. We went through the book, The Let Them Theory, which I learned a ton from. So thanks to Mel Robbins for that. She's also great to follow on Instagram, has some good tips, has a previous book, The 5 Second Rule. So check those out. And we would love to hear how you're implementing this book into your daily life, including kids or personal life or work. So, however you're implementing that, please like our podcast, share it, check us out on YouTube, Instagram, and all the places you find your favorite podcast. Thanks so much for listening today. Thanks, Michael, for being here, and we'll see you on the next one.
All right. Thanks again.